In 2025, the Walt Disney Company released a new version of the animated film. I guess it would be computer-generated film. Now it's called Snow White. And Snow White famously has flopped or didn't do as well as Disney had hoped. I think they spent $200 million on it, and or $250 million, and they only made 200 of it. They're expecting it to be a blockbuster, and it didn't, for all sorts of reasons. Some people blame the stars. Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter. It didn't do well. But the point of this video is I wanted to talk about the first Snow White and compare it. The first Snow White was Disney's first animated, full-length animated film, and it starred the voice of a woman named Adriana Caselotti, and that's what today's story is about. Adriana Caselotti was paid a whopping $970 for her role of Snow White, voice only. Granted, she was behind the, in front of a radio microphone or whatever, recording it. $970, which I think is about $21,000 in nowadays money. And just by comparison, Rachel Zegler, who was Snow White in this release that just got panned or didn't do very well, she made $2 million. The woman who played the evil Queen, I looked her up, Gal Gadot, I think is how they say her name. $15 million she got paid to do that. Adriana Caselotti, $970. They didn't even give her a credit in the movie. They didn't even mention her name for 5 years because Walt Disney didn't want to screw up the magic of who Snow White may have been. The cast weren't even invited to the premiere of it. Adriana said that she had to sneak in through an exit door with her co-star Prince Charming, Harry Stockwell, because they were not given invitations to this. So Adriana never made a whole lot of money with Snow White. She did in the autograph shows. That's how I met her, and she did appearances here and there, and she became a Disney legend. Which, you get your footprints at Disney, but not money. that's the Disney way. And it's kind of funny because in that 1989 Academy Awards, which I will die on a hill because that was so good, and I think it's the best ever. They had a woman, Eileen Bowman, who played Snow White at the beginning, and before it was even finished with her little skit, Disney had already filed lawsuits about how protective they are of Snow White, but not their stars. But Adriana Caselotti went on to do singing. You'd recognize her in The Wizard of Oz. You'd recognize her if you're a fan of It's a Wonderful Life. And this is about her and her funny little home where she lived and where she died in an area called Larchmont. It's a wacky little home with a wishing well. So today's story is about Adriana Caselotti. Snow White. Back when I moved to Hollywood in the early 1990s to work for the Real Grave Line tours, driving a hearse through Los Angeles, I met Adriana a couple of times. I met her at the autograph shows, and I never really had an appreciation for her until years later. I was so enamored with sort of kooky Hollywood celebrities, of which there were so many back then. And so it was kind of an amazement to me to meet her and think, well, there's an odd little story. And she was a bit kooky herself. And she signed this picture for me, which was really, really nice. But I'll see you in the hearse while I whistle while I work in my garden. The voice of Snow White, Adriana Caselotti. Now, back then, I took these pictures of her house back then. There were no shrubs around here. You could see perfectly well. And she had her wishing well out in front, along with the sign in front of it. It was a Japanese garden that she had, and it was in sort of Japanese lettering. I'm wishing. The house used to be really visible from the street. None of this greenery was there. And the actually you can still see where the wishing well is, right? The fence. You can see the little roof of it. So you'd often see her out here gardening or whatever. Adriana grew up in a music family. Her mother was an opera singer, and her father taught music and was a musician and was friends with Roy Scott, who was the casting director for Walt Disney.
My father was a singing teacher in Los Angeles, and one day one of the Walt Disney representatives called his studio and asked if he knew of a little girl who could sing and speak like a child would, but still have had some operatic training, because there would be many high notes in this thing they had planned. I didn't know what it was, but I was listening in the extension phone upstairs, and I said, "Papa, how about me? I can do this." And I went,
The guy from Disney was interested, so we auditioned her. Out of 150 people, Walt Disney hired her to be the voice of Snow White, and she was paid the $970 for 44 days' work. If you look around the corner, you can see a bit of the wishing well. And here's a photograph I took of the wishing well back in the 90s, where she had that sign in front of it that said, "I'm wishing," and she posed in front of that thing a lot. It was a popular photo op place for her. Adriana really embraced the Snow White thing. I think it's kind of, I think she may have resented it in the most kindest way for many, many years. She was thrilled with it ultimately, with the association and the immortality of it. And she collected Snow White stuff like crazy. I'm sure fans sent her a lot of items too. Now, by far, Snow White was probably the most famous job she ever had. But there were two other classic films that Adriana not appeared, but you heard her in, where she sang. And one of them was in The Wizard of Oz. When the Tin Man sings the song, "If I Only Had a Heart," you hear the unmistakable voice of Adriana.
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
I think she got $100 for doing The Wizard of Oz. And there's also a really emotional scene in the movie It's a Wonderful Life when Jimmy Stewart is just reconsidering almost everything and is in the Martini's bar in the film, and you hear Adriana singing in the background.
How about some of that good spaghetti? We got everything.
Lawsuits. Of course, there were lawsuits because it involved Disney and one of their properties to which they're famously protective and litigious about. That's why they can't stand the fact that they don't own Peter Pan or Winnie the Pooh, and the rights to those belong to someone else. So Disney, it makes them insane. Now, in 1955, there was a film called Lady and the Tramp, and it starred Peggy Lee, who wrote several of the songs for the film and spoke and sang for four of the characters in the film. She was originally paid about $3,500 for the film. Only the film. So when Disney released it on VHS, she said, my contract, it was for the film, not for this VHS, and Disney made about $90 million on the VHS. So Peggy Lee went through this arduous lawsuit. I mean, it went on for 4 years, and Disney resentfully paid her about $4 million. And since then, the film has grossed $187 million. In 1938, Adriana and her Prince Charming co-star Harry Stockwell apparently sued Disney for the rights to the share of the soundtrack that was released on LP. And that was unsuccessful. They wanted $200,000 or something like that, but it was unsuccessful. During subsequent re-releases of the film, and it was reaching new generations, Adriana considered taking legal action against Disney, at least to get credit in the film. But after witnessing what Peggy Lee went through, Adriana thought better of it and chose to let it go because she loved the character. In her life, Adriana was married and divorced 3 times. She dabbled in real estate and the stock market and apparently did quite well for herself. In her later years, she occasionally did interviews and she attended autograph shows. This woman, whose voice was heard in 3 of the top 100 films of all time, according to the American Film Institute, was selling her autographs for $10 a pop and being the answer to trivia questions in newspapers across the world for the rest of her life. She continued to live in her little home with the wishing well, and it was in that home that Adriana died on January 19th, 1997 at the age of 80. She had lung and breast cancer and ultimately died from respiratory failure. The Disney company released a statement. We really feel as if we lost a member of the family. Adriana played such an important part in our history and became the true embodiment of that wonderful character. Although Adriana's father is buried in Forest Lawn, Glendale, her mother in Hollywood forever, Adriana herself was cremated and scattered 3 miles off the coastline of Newport Beach. Adriana once said, "I know my voice will never die." Oh, remember that 1989 Academy Awards Snow White debacle in which Disney sued the Academy for not giving the rights? Well, that lawsuit was dismissed after after the Academy sincerely apologized to Disney. Disney generously forgave them for using Snow White. It was a total misappropriation of our copyright characters, and those copyright characters are the heart and soul of our business. The mouse needs a lot of cheese. There was an Easter egg in the film Enchanted where the character of a TV reporter was called Mary Eileen Caselotti for Mary Costa, Eileen Woods, and Adriana, who were the voices for Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and Snow White. Adriana's home, which was apparently custom built for her, was sold off in 2012 for just under $1 million. When the home was first put up for sale, Chris Nichols from LA Magazine wrote that the new owners of this adorable little fantasy cottage are removing the charming Japanese-style bridge and statuary and offering them free online. In 2025, the 2,200 square foot 3-bedroom home is worth $2.6 million. Before I finish, there's one other related but not related story. On Hollywood Boulevard for 78 years, there was a restaurant called the Snow White Cafe. Although it wasn't affiliated with the Walt Disney Company, the inside had artwork on the walls that were created or painted by the original Disney animators of Snow White. Now, the Disney Corporation apparently let it go because the owner was a friend of Walt Disney's, and also Walt Disney was a regular. When you were inside the restaurant and exiting back onto Hollywood Boulevard, there was a wonderful mural above the door that said, "We hope we have pleased you." That cafe closed abruptly in June of 2024. No one knew what happened. Apparently, there's going to be a candy store or something like that, but it was unannounced and without fanfare, just done. So thank you all very much for watching this video. Rest in peace, Adriana Caselotti. You certainly left behind a legacy that very few know about.
Get away from that exhibit. Where do you think you are? Disneyland? You heard me.